Blind date fiasco. The CEO sat by himself until twin sisters climbed his chair and softly said, "Hi." Saturday night in Port Astra, the fictional East Coast port city was slick with a cold mist that blurred the neon signs, making the skyline bleed into the black water of the harbor. Inside the Vesper and Company, the air was thick with the scent of old wood, expensive gin, and quiet desperation. In the VIP room, separated from the main floor by a pane of smoked glass, Cassian Rourke sat alone. At 42, the CEO of Northlight Capital was a man carved from granite, his suit a precise armor. The blind date, arranged by a well-meaning but foolish board member, was a no-show. It was 9:15. He had given her 45 minutes. He was done. Cassian signaled for the check, his patience a finite resource, already depleted by a week of navigating volatile markets. He was sliding his credit card back into his wallet when a shadow, or rather two, fell over his table. He did not look up immediately. He preferred to let people come to him. But this was different. There was no polite cough, no Mr. Rourke, just a sudden, intimate shift in the air pressure beside him. Two women, identical and striking, with hair as black as the ink of a squid, were climbing onto the padded leather of his booth, not sitting, but climbing, one on each side, with an athletic grace that was utterly out of place. They settled on the high backrest, their legs bracketing him, their shoulders pressing into his. The scent of rain and something metallic, like ozone, hit him. Then, in precise, breathy unison, they whispered, "Hi." Cassian froze. This was not in any playbook he knew. The air in the booth crackled, suddenly dense and dangerous. Before he could form a word, the woman on his left, he would later learn this was Sarah, picked up his untouched whiskey glass. She looked him dead in the eye, her own dark and assessing, and brought the rim to her lips. She did not drink. She simply pressed her mouth to the glass, leaving a perfect, crimson crescent of lipstick. She set it down, a mark, a claim. Simultaneously, the woman on his right, Nomi, placed a hand on the small of his back. Her fingers splayed. The touch was not tentative. It was proprietary, the familiar gesture of a long-standing lover's claiming her partner in a crowded room. It was a performance, a flawless, unspoken ritual designed to fool anyone who might be watching. And someone was watching. Cassian's eyes flicked to the antique mirror behind the bar, which gave him a distorted but clear view of the main room's entrance. Two men in long, dark coats stood just inside the doorway. They were not patrons. Their eyes swept the room, cold and methodical, pausing on every face. They wore the telltale silver pins of the Marrow Syndicate, a quiet, cancerous growth within Port Astra's financial district. Nomi, the one at his back, smiled at him. It was a dazzling, affectionate smile that did not reach her eyes. She leaned in, her hair brushing his cheek, playing the part of the adoring girlfriend, as she did. Sarah, the one who had marked his glass, discreetly let her hand fall below the table. Cassian heard a faint metallic click as something small and magnetic attached to the table's metal pedestal, a jamming chip. They were turning him into a shield, a plausible cover story. Cassian Rourke was a cold man. He built his empire on logic, on data, on seeing 10 moves ahead. He did not do chaos, but his business intuition, the very instinct that made him a predator in the boardroom, screamed at him. This was not a random encounter, a deal, or perhaps a catastrophe of unprecedented scale, had just landed in his lap. The lights above the bar flickered, buzzing audibly as the jammer took hold. The music stuttered. Sarah leaned in, her lips brushing the shell of his ear. Her voice was no longer a whisper. It was a blade. If you stand up now, they will drag you outside. The two syndicate men were looking directly at the VIP booth now, their expressions hardening as the lights failed. They started to move. Cassian had 2 seconds to make a choice. He could stand, declare himself uninvolved, and trust in his name and the city's fragile laws, or he could play the hand he was dealt. He looked from Sira's challenging gaze to Nomi's false, bright smile. He chose the chaos. With a fluid motion, Cassian Rourke, CEO, reached out and took Sarah's hand, lacing his fingers with hers. He turned his body slightly, bringing his shoulder against Nomi's, a gesture of inclusive, shared intimacy. He smiled, a rare, wolfish expression that was utterly convincing. He was no longer a man stood up on a date. He was a man joyfully ambushed by two women he clearly adored. He was acting out a reunion. The Marrow men stopped. They squinted into the dim, flickering light of the VIP section. They saw a rich man, tangled up with two beautiful women, lost in their own private world. It was a common enough sight at the Vesper. It was not the target they were looking for. With a shared, disgusted shrug, they turned their attention back to the main room, scanning other faces. Cassian felt Sirah's fingers tighten in his, a silent acknowledgement. In his pocket, his phone vibrated. He did not look at it, keeping his gaze locked with Sirah's. Then, a shrill, piercing shriek split the air, the fire alarm. "That's us," Nomi said, her voice dropping the girlfriend act, becoming all business. The bar erupted. Patrons stumbled from their chairs, shouting in confusion. The syndicate men were momentarily blinded by the flashing emergency strobes. Nomi had already vaulted over the back of the booth. Sarah tugged on his hand. "Move!" Cassian did not hesitate. He followed them, not as a victim, but as a participant. They bypassed the panicked main exit, pushing through a door marked staff and plunging into a narrow service hallway. They hit the back alley door just as the first sounds of sirens grew closer. The door slammed shut behind them, cutting off the alarm. They stood in a narrow alley, the air smelling of wet asphalt and old fish. A cold drizzle began to fall. Back inside the Vesper and Company, an empty booth sat in the VIP room, a single whiskey glass marked with a kiss of crimson. The disastrous date had officially become a storm. Cassian finally pulled his phone from his pocket. The anonymous message that had arrived moments before glowed on the screen. "Thank you. You just bought a few new enemies tonight." The sound of the fire alarm faded, replaced by the hiss of rain on asphalt and the distant wail of Port Astra's emergency services heading to the wrong place. They were 2 blocks away, huddled in the prepaid anonymity of a multi-story parking garage, the air cold and smelling of concrete and unburned gasoline. "You have," Cassian said, his voice dangerously quiet as he straightened his cuffs, "approximately 10 seconds to explain what I just walked into." Sarah was leaning against a support pillar, unfazed. Nomi was already at the ticket kiosk, her back to them, working on something. "We are being hunted," Sarah said, as if commenting on the weather. "The men in the bar were from the Marrow Syndicate." "I know who they are," Cassian cut in. "I want to know why they were looking for you." "Because we stole their black ledger." Sarah pushed off the pillar and held up a slim, metallic data drive. Not the whole thing, just the key, the directory to a decade's worth of their fintech money laundering operations. Cassian's expression remained impassive, but a muscle in his jaw tightened. Marrow is old world muscle. They don't do fintech. "They do now," Sarah said. She stepped closer, into the weak yellow light of the garage, and held up a small, high-resolution tablet. She'd been holding it at her side. She tapped the screen. A blurred document appeared, a complex wire transfer diagram. "They've been washing money through shell companies, just like everyone else. But they got smart. They started using special-purpose vehicles, set up by legitimate partners, to funnel the cash through high-risk, high-yield venture funds." She zoomed in on one corner of the document. Cassian's breath hitched. It was blurred, clearly a photo taken in haste, but the logo was unmistakable. It was the stylized, soaring N of Northlight Capital. "That's impossible, he said. The words came out flat, stripped of his usual authority. "Is it," Sarah challenged, "or is it just inconvenient?" "I am an ethical hacker." The voice came from Nomi. She had returned from the kiosk, holding 3 new parking vouchers, or gray hat, if you want to be precise. I work with an NGO, the Harbor Line Watch. We're fictional, as far as the city charter is concerned. She held up a matching data drive. I pulled this from a shadow server Mero was running. They buried it in the wine cellar of their downtown steakhouse, shielded by 6 feet of concrete and rebar. They thought it was safe. And she, Nomi added, nodding at her twin, is a crisis lawyer. She takes the things I find and makes them explode in public. She's affiliated with the Civic Anti-Corruption Directorate. Another fictional organization, I presume, Cassian said, his mind racing, trying to process the violation, his fund, his name. The CACD is very real, I assure you, Sarah said, her tone sharp as a razor. It just doesn't have a sign on the door. I'm preparing a civil forfeiture suit to seize the assets of every shell company on that list. We're going to pull the rug out from under Mero, and we're going to do it with paperwork. Cassian looked at the logo on the screen again. My company is not a shell. No, Sarah agreed. You're the shield. They're using your reputation, your legitimacy. This SPV, it was set up by one of your partners. The money goes in clean, dances with your venture capital, and comes out pristine. No real government agencies are named, because this is all private sector sleight of hand. She finally stated the purpose of the night. They were moving the server tonight. We had one shot. Now we have the data. But Mero has locked down the city. Every port, every tunnel, every bridge. They have eyes at every checkpoint, and they are looking for us. And me, Cassian finished, the pieces clicking into place. You, Nomi confirmed, are a clean face, a CEO with $1 billion portfolio. You are not on their watch list. Not yet. You were our exit strategy. We just needed a plausible stranger to hand the package to. And the scene in the bar? An improvisation, Sarah said. They showed up early. We had to make you look like you were with us. You were a good actor. Cassian was trapped between a lifetime of professional pride and a sudden, sickening moral responsibility. The question burned in his mind, sharp and terrifying. Was Northlight used, or was I betrayed from within? A black sedan with tinted windows turned into the garage entrance 2 levels below. It moved slowly, too slowly, its headlights sweeping the concrete ramps. Down, Nomi hissed. She grabbed the back of Cassian's jacket and yanked him down behind a parked, rusting truck. Sarah was already on one knee, moving with a predator's fluidity. The car crawled up the ramp. Cassian could hear its engine, a low, powerful rumble. As it passed their level, he saw Sarah's hand move. She had drawn a folding knife from a sheath in her combat boot. It was not a weapon for show. It was matte black steel, and she held it with an expertise that made the air around her feel 10 degrees colder. There was no sound but the click of the lock as the blade snapped into place. The sedan continued up, toward the roof. They're searching, Nomi whispered, her eyes on the taillights. We have to move, now. They ran, low and fast, down a stairwell to the automated retrieval bay. It was a massive, sterile room filled with robotic lifts. Nomi jacked a device into the main payment console. The screen flickered, and a wireless script bypassed the security. A moment later, a sleek, anonymous gray sedan was delivered from the stacking system. Get in, Sarah ordered. As the sisters checked the car, Cassian stood in the bay, the betrayal he saw on that screen burning brighter than the fluorescent lights. He pulled out his phone and dialed Elias Wren, the chairman of Northlight's board, his mentor. The call connected. You've reached the office of Elias Wren. A smooth, automated voice announced, I am currently out of the country on personal business and will not be reachable. Please leave a message. Out of the country. On a Saturday night when the most significant breach in company history had just been revealed, the absence of his mentor felt less like a coincidence and more like a confirmation. Cassian got into the passenger seat. The car smelled new, sterile. Nomi was in the back, her laptop already open, the green glow of the screen reflecting in her glasses. Sarah slid into the driver's seat. She turned to Cassian, the engine humming quietly. Tonight, you have the right to refuse, she said. Her voice was low, devoid of any of the false intimacy from the bar. This was the real woman. We can drop you at the next corner. You can go home, call your lawyers, and pretend this never happened. But if you stay, if you are in this car when we drive out of this garage, you become a target. You become complicit. And she paused, her dark eyes locking with his. You become our only chance. The gray sedan slid into the shadow of the old Port Astra glassworks, its engine cutting off to leave a silence broken only by the lazy, toxic slap of the canal against the stone embankment. This was Nomi's safe house. The air inside the abandoned factory was sharp, tasting of cold dust, rust, and the ghosts of old fires. It was a cathedral of broken things. Nomi was already at the far end of the cavernous room, her face illuminated in the cold blue light of her laptop screen. "Sit," Sarah commanded. She pointed a chin toward an overturned wooden crate. Cassian looked down at the back of his right hand. A long, shallow scrape, beaded with blood, marked the skin from his knuckle to his wrist. He must have done it on the brickwork in the alley, or perhaps the stairwell. He hadn't felt it. The adrenaline of the last hour had insulated him. "It's nothing." "It's an opening," Sarah replied, her voice flat, "and we don't leave openings." She dropped her bag and pulled a small, comprehensive first aid kit from an inner pocket. She knelt in front of him, and the sudden proximity felt more dangerous than the men in the bar. Her efficiency was absolute. She tore open an antiseptic wipe, the chemical smell sharp in the dusty air. Her touch was not gentle. It was competent. She cleaned the wound with firm, deliberate strokes. The sting was sharp, grounding him, but it was the brush of her skin against his that held his attention. Her fingers were steady, but the contact sent a jolt through his system, a signal his insulated, data-driven world had long since filtered out. He hadn't realized he was holding his breath until he had to let it out. It hitched, a small, involuntary catch in his chest. Sarah paused, her work half finished. Her eyes, which he had assumed were simply dark, lifted to his. She was close enough that he could see. In the strange orange light, the complex flecks of brown and green within the black. She studied him, not as a woman, but as an analyst assessing an unpredictable variable. "Let's be clear. Cassian," she said, her voice a low murmur that cut through the silence. She returned to her work, this time unspooling a roll of cloth bandage. "This is not a partnership. This is a temporary, high-risk alliance." "What are the terms?" he asked, the language of deals, of negotiations. This was his home turf, even if the office was a ruin. "Rule 1, secrecy," she said, wrapping the gauze, her touch precise. "You don't ask what we did before tonight. We don't ask what you'll do after this is over. Rule 2, legal jeopardy. You are now materially involved in circumventing a criminal investigation and withholding evidence. My affiliation with the CACD won't protect you if you break ranks." She finished the wrap, tucking the end with a decisive, firm motion. "Rule 3, consent. We operate on explicit agreement in everything." She sat back on her heels, the work done. The orange sodium light from the broken clerestory window cut across her face, carving it into hard planes of shadow and light. Cassian found himself doing the unexpected. He smiled. It was a small, dry, humorless expression. "You sound remarkably like my divorce lawyer." The air between them changed. The hard lines of her face softened. Just for a fraction of a second, the analyzer in her eyes was replaced by simple, unguarded curiosity. A bad divorce. "Is there any other kind?" he countered. "We wouldn't know." The voice came from the darkness. Nomi. Her typing had not ceased, but her attention was clearly on them. "We learned early. Gannett Row." Cassian knew the name. Gannett Row was the docks, the long-neglected fishing piers where the city swept its problems and the Marrow Syndicate recruited its foot soldiers. "Out there," Nomi continued, her voice detached. "The only rule is survival, and the only pact that matters is the one you make with the person who has your back. Sarah and I made our pact when we were 10 years old, watching the trawlers come in, never break, never bend, never, ever leave the other behind. The silence that followed was heavy, filled with the sisters' shared history. Cassian looked at his newly bandaged hand. It felt strange, cared for. "I don't have anyone's back," and he said, the admission quiet. Not like that. He hadn't intended to say it, but the words felt true. "My marriage ended 3 years ago. She said I was emotionally frozen, that I live by numbers, not by people." He looked up, meeting Sarah's steady gaze. "She said I manage risk so obsessively I forgot how to feel it. She was right. I am a man who trusts data. And tonight my data is irrevocably compromised." Sarah did not move. She did not offer easy comfort or platitudes. She just watched him, absorbing the confession, processing it. Then, slowly, she reached out. She did not take his hand. She did not touch his shoulder. She placed 2 fingertips on the inside of his wrist, just above the bandage, where his pulse beat strong and fast against the skin. The touch was light, but it anchored him in the spinning chaos of the night. "You're right to be obsessed with control. Cassian, so am I," she said, her voice so low he barely heard it. "But tonight, your variables are all wrong. You're in my world now." Her fingers pressed, just slightly, a gesture of absolute, terrifying confidence. "Tonight, let me control the tempo." A sharp, digital beep broke the spell. "Sarah," Nomi's voice was sharp, all business. "We have a problem. Nightingale is moving." "What is Nightingale?" Cassian asked, pulling his wrist back, the connection broken. "Marrow's cash out," Sarah said, standing up in one fluid motion. The brief vulnerability was gone, encased in steel again. The physical currency, the container. If they get it on a boat, the data we have becomes 10 times harder to prosecute. She reached into her own shirt and pulled a tarnished silver chain from around her neck. On it was a simple, rectangular pendant, brushed metal. "Here." She pressed it into his good hand. It was cold and heavier than it looked. "This holds the public key for the drives. It's our insurance. If we get separated, you hold on to this. You don't lose it. You don't give it to anyone but me or Nomi. Understood?" "Understood," he said, closing his fist around the metal. It felt like a covenant. "Good," Nomi said, snapping her laptop shut and sliding it into a backpack. "Because we have approximately 30 minutes to intercept a 20-ton shipping container before it disappears." They moved to the door. Cassian, his mind recalibrated by the new, insane variables, moved first, pulling the heavy steel door open just a crack. As he stepped out into the damp, chemical-smelling canal air, Sarah fell into step just behind his right shoulder. It was not a subservient position. It was tactical. It was the formation of a unit. In the distance, the mournful, lonely sound of a train whistle cut through the night. It sounded to Cassian like a warning, a final call for a journey that was equal parts guilt and just maybe redemption. The drive to the West Quay was fast and silent, the city's neon-slicked streets blurring into the industrial grime of the port. Nomi, in the back seat, had taken a white grease pen to the partition glass between the front and back. "West Quay Warehouse 14, she said, her voice tight, the pen scratching as she drew. "It's not a vault, it's a mixing point. Marrow's dirty cash arrives in a container, Nightingale, and gets blended with legitimate cargo manifests. They use the warehouse's local server to update the main shipping ledger, but they keep a second, offline ledger of the real transactions. That's Ledger 2.0. "And that's what we're here for," Sarah said, her eyes on the road. "We aren't," Nomi corrected. "I am. My job is to get inside the comms box, tap the local server, clone Ledger 2.0, and simultaneously re-tag Nightingale's RFID. I'll assign its ID to a decoy container full of scrap metal that's headed for the bottom of the Atlantic. Nightingale itself will be logged as damaged goods and sit in quarantine. It'll buy us 48 hours. Sarah pulled the car into a dark alley across from the warehouse, killing the lights. The massive corrugated steel building loomed in the sodium lamp orange glow. "Sarah, you're the broker," Nomi continued, tapping a point on her glass diagram. "You're here to expedite the Nightingale transfer. You'll go in the front, keep the foreman busy." "And me?" Cassian asked. His voice sounded strange in this new context. The CEO's baritone in a back alley heist. Sarah and Nomi looked at each other. Then Sarah turned to him. "You're the non-specialist, which means you're the liability. You are to stay within 10 feet of me. If a real security officer, not marrow muscle but a Port Authority cop, shows up, you are to handle it." "Handle it how?" "Non-violently," Sarah said. "You're a CEO. You speak their language. You're a lost executive. You're checking on a shipment. You're furious about delays. You dazzle them with jargon. You threaten their pensions. You do whatever you do in boardrooms. You are a negotiator. You do not get physical." "I understand." Cassian said. He understood perfectly. He was the distraction for the real distraction. Sarah got out, pulling on a high-visibility jacket over her dark clothes, a hard hat under her arm. "Nomi, you have 5 minutes. Cassian, stay with me." Nomi was already a shadow, sprinting across the street to a junction box on the side of the warehouse, her backpack bouncing. Sarah and Cassian walked through the main gate. A single, bored-looking man sat in a guard hut. Sarah flashed a forged ID on a lanyard. "Sarah Vale, Port Logistics, here for the Nightingale transfer. We're running late." The man, a stocky figure with a face like worn leather, grunted and waved them in. He was not Marrow. This was too easy. They entered the vast, cavernous warehouse. The smell of diesel, salt, and rust was overwhelming. A forklift hummed in the distance. The foreman's office was a glass box raised 10 feet above the floor. "Wait here," Sarah told Cassian, pointing to a spot by a stack of pallets. She headed for the stairs. A new figure emerged from the shadows beneath the office. This one was not in a uniform. He wore a sharp, cheap suit. He was tall, thin, and had the nickname Gull written all over his predatory, beak-nosed face. He held a tablet. "You're Vale?" he asked, his voice a reedy whine. "I am," Sarah said, stopping at the base of the stairs. "I'm here to sign off on Nightingale." "Funny," Gull said, stepping into the light. "Handoff was supposed to be wet ink. My boss, he hates digital signatures, says they're flexible." He was trying to intimidate her, a low-level thug enjoying his moment of power. He was angling her away from the office, into a darker corner between 2 towering racks of shelving. "We're just going to have a little chat about the manifest." This was not part of the plan. Cassian watched Gull put a hand on Sarah's arm, his grip too familiar, too tight. "I'm afraid," Sarah said, her voice like ice, "that my signature is the only one you're getting." "Maybe you should reconsider," Gull said, his other hand going to the inside of his jacket. Cassian moved. He did not run. He walked. His footsteps measured on the concrete floor, echoing in the huge space. He stepped out of the shadows and into the pool of light beside them. "Excuse me," he said. The voice was not his alleyway voice. It was the voice that chaired board meetings, the voice that acquired companies, the voice that brokered 9-figure deals. It was calm, cold, and utterly dominant. Gull released Sarah's arm. Startled, he looked Cassian up and down. "Who the hell are you?" "I am the man who is currently underwriting the risk on this entire facility." Cassian lied, his tone suggesting Gull was an idiot for even asking. "And I am asking why this asset," Darling, he gestured. "Is this unit insured for market volatility, or just for transit? Because if you're holding a liquid asset in a static position for more than a single fiscal hour, you are not just losing money, you are hemorrhaging it. The arbitrage on this transfer is 9%. You have personally cost your employer 0.5 percentage point just by having this conversation." Gull was completely lost, buried under a landslide of words he didn't understand but knew were important. He was floundering. I'm just doing my job." Your job, Cassian said, stepping closer, is to facilitate the transfer of assets, not to debate logistics with my broker, or is there a problem with the liquidity? Is your boss unable to cover his position? Gull was cornered. He was a thug, not a financier. He did the only thing he knew how to do. His hand, the one in his jacket, moved. A single, metallic click cut through the air, the sound of a safety being thumbed off. It was a clear, unambiguous threat. The warehouse fell silent. No forklift, no distant traffic, just the three of them in the yellow light. Sarah did not move. She was looking at Cassian. Her face was a mask, but her eyes were alive. She was watching him, not as a victim, but as a partner. It was a silent, unblinking. "My apologies," Sarah said, her voice suddenly smooth. "All business. My associate is passionate about punctuality. If you'll just sign off on the tablet, Gull will be out of your way." Gull looked from Cassian's unblinking, expensive stare to Sarah's offered hand. He was trapped. He couldn't shoot them. Not here. Not over paperwork. But he couldn't back down. A tiny beep came from Sarah's ear. She smiled. "Never mind, it seems the transfer just cleared automatically. Thank you for your time." She put a hand on Cassian's arm and pulled. "We're leaving." They walked, not ran, back toward the main gate. "Hey!" Gull shouted, his voice echoing, full of frustrated rage. "You can't just yet." But they were already past the gate. As they crossed the street to their car, Cassian glanced up. A black, dome-shaped security camera on the corner of the warehouse whirred, turned, and zoomed. Its small red light was fixed directly on his face. The circle was tightening. They were back in the shadows of the canal, their breathing still ragged, the adrenaline starting to fade. Cassian leaned against the car, the night's events catching up to him. His tie was crooked, pulled loose during the confrontation. "You were good in there," Sarah said. Her voice was quiet, almost soft. She stepped in front of him, into his personal space. He could smell the ozone and rain on her again. "But you're a mess." She reached up, her hands going to his tie. He stood perfectly still. Her fingers were steady as she straightened the silk knot, then tucked the ends back into his jacket. As she did, the pads of her fingers brushed the skin of his throat, just above the knot, right on his collarbone. It was not a wound, and this was not a bandage. It was a simple, fleeting touch, but a spark, sharp and hot, arced through the gap between them, and Cassian to breathe. The Ash Lantern was a boutique hotel tucked into a converted 19th century warehouse, a place that specialized in expensive anonymity. The room Nomi had secured was in the attic, beneath the heavy, sloping eaves. The only light came from a single, rain-lashed casement window, and the room was filled with the rhythmic drumming of the storm. It was the first moment they had been truly alone, and the silence was louder than the warehouse confrontation. They stood facing each other, 2 feet of worn Persian rug separating them, the events of the last few hours hanging in the air. "You're a terrifying man in a negotiation," Sarah said, her voice quiet, stripped of its legal eagle sharpness. "And you're a terrifying woman with a plan," Cassian replied. He could feel the adrenaline finally draining away, leaving an exhaustion so deep it was a physical ache. "I'm used to controlling the variables. Sarah, tonight I'm just a passenger. I hate this feeling." "And I hate the opposite," she countered, stepping closer to the window, watching the rain distort the city lights. "I hate being tied down. I hate attachments. I spend my life making sure I can walk away from any room, any person. It's the only control I trust." She turned back to him. He was a man undone. His expensive suit was wrinkled, his hair was damp, and the raw scrape on his hand, now covered by her bandage, was a stark reminder of the night's violence. His armor was cracked. "Your fear is losing control," she whispered, taking a single step toward him. "My fear is being controlled." She took another step. The space between them was electric, charged with unspoken risk, a different kind of negotiation. She stopped, just within arm's reach. He could see the pulse beating in her throat. She did not look away. Her eyes asked a question about his divorce, and his board meetings had never prepared him for... "Cassian," she breathed, her voice a fragile inquiry. "Is this just another variable?" He understood. This was Rule 3 consent. He was a man of words, of contracts and clauses. But in this moment, his throat was dry. He could only give a single, slow nod, a yes that ceded all his control to her. She closed the distance. The kiss was not a collision of pent-up passion. It was a deep, slow, and overwhelming discovery. It was warm, and it tasted of the cold rain still on her lips. His hands, acting on an instinct he thought he had buried, found her waist. His fingers gripping the fabric of her jacket, he was anchoring himself. She felt solid, real, a single point of truth in a day built on lies. Her hand came up, not to his face, but to his chest, her palm pressing flat against his sternum. He felt his heart leap against her hand, a wild, frantic bird in a cage. The sensation was so profound, so immediate, it stole his breath. She was leading, just as she had promised she would. Her other hand slid around his back, her fingers tracing the rigid, tense line of his spine through the fabric of his shirt. He shuddered, a response not to the cold, but to the deliberate, possessive, and utterly grounding touch. His grip on her waist tightened, a silent answer, a pulling her closer. He did not rush, did not push. He followed her tempo. Their movement was a clumsy, tangled shift of weight, a half-step back that ended with them sinking onto the long, velvet-covered chaise lounge by the window. The city's golden streetlight, fractured by the rain, painted stripes of light and shadow across them. He was half lying, half sitting, and she was with him. Her body fitted against his. A low, breathless laugh escaped her as they nearly toppled, a sound of pure, uncalculated surprise. "Don't rush," he heard himself murmur, the words thick, his lips against her hair. The scene slowed. There was the sound of their breathing, merging, deepening, the rustle of his jacket being pushed aside, the whisper of her shirt. His tie was gone. Her fingers, no longer assessing, were now exploring, lacing with his, gripping tight. His hand moved from her waist to her jaw, his thumb stroking the soft skin, a gesture of pure, un-CIO-like tenderness. This was the inferno, not of flames, but of warmth, of proximity. It was the scent of her skin, clean and sharp like the storm. It was the heat radiating from her, chasing the chill from his bones. It was the shared, silent understanding that this was a moment stolen from the world that was trying to hunt them. The attic window, battered by the cold November rain, began to fog over from the sudden warmth, the glass blurring, the city lights, the chasing cars, the whole of Port Astra dissolved into a soft, indistinct glow. Later, the storm outside had settled into a steady, quiet hiss. They lay on the narrow chaise, tangled in the shadows, his suit jacket now a makeshift pillow. The adrenaline was gone, replaced by a profound, heavy calm. "I collect aliases," Sarah said, her voice soft in the darkness, her head resting on his chest. "Beautiful ones, Ariadne, Vesper, Echo. I use them as talismans, little pieces of armor, in case one name gets too heavy." Cassian's hand was in her hair, his fingers idly tracing the silk of it. "I only have one name," he admitted, his own voice sounding distant, unfamiliar. "One I've spent my entire life building, and tonight, it was worthless. You." He paused, the truth of the words hitting him. "You chose me. In that warehouse. You trusted me. Not the CEO, not the Northlight name. Me, the liability. I don't think I've ever felt that before. Truly chosen." A phone buzzed on the hardwood floor, a harsh, mechanical sound that shattered the peace. Neither moved. It buzzed again. With a sigh, Sarah untangled herself, the loss of her warmth immediate. She leaned over the side, grabbing her phone. The screen cast a cold blue light over her face. "What is it?" he asked, already knowing the answer. "It's Nomi." She sat up, and he watched the lawyer, the crisis manager, reassemble herself. She says, "Storm's rolling in." She's not talking about the weather. The moment was over. The real world had broken down the door. Sarah looked at him, her eyes clear and focused. "But the morning is still ours. We have a few hours." She stood, and he felt a pang of loss, but she was only moving to the small table where he had left his few possessions. She picked up the tarnished silver pendant she had given him. He thought she was taking it back. Instead, she walked back to the chaise and sat on the edge. He was still lying down. She didn't put the chain around her own neck. She leaned over, her hair brushing his face, and settled the chain around his. The metal was cool against his skin. She placed the pendant on his chest, right over his heart, where her hand had been. "Keep this," she said. It was not a request. It was a commitment, a silent promise, a new kind of insurance. It was not a word of love, but it felt heavier. The storm arrived at 5 a.m. It did not come with thunder, but with the silent, vicious vibration of Cassian's reactivated phone. The attic room at the ash lantern, which had felt like a sanctuary, instantly became a cage. The headline was from Slate Key, a ruthless financial blog that traded in rumors and, too often, facts. Northlight's Darklight CEO Cassian Rourke's deep dive with the Marrow Syndicate. Below it, his face, grainy and clear, captured by the warehouse security camera. By 6 a.m, Northlight's associated funds in the Asian markets had already dropped 12%. "They're framing you," Sarah said. She was already dressed, standing by the window, the gray light etching her profile. "They're sloppy," Cassian replied, his fingers a blur as he typed, "calling an emergency board meeting. They used me, and now they're trying to cut me loose. It's too clean." At 7 a.m, Cassian Rourke, wearing a fresh suit delivered by one of Nomi's invisible contacts, walked into the Northlight Capital boardroom. The silver pendant Sarah had given him was a cold, heavy secret beneath the crisp cotton of his shirt. Elias Wren was there, the chairman of the board, his mentor. He looked like he hadn't slept. "Cassian, this article. The board is demanding answers." "They'll get them," Cassian said. He looked past Elias to his chief financial officer, Audrey Pike, a woman who lived and breathed numbers. "Audrey, tell me about the Shorepine Fund." Audrey Pike, known for her composure, visibly flinched. "Shorepine, it's a high-yield tech incubator fund, an SPV. The board approved it 6 months ago." "Who proposed it?" All eyes turned to Elias. "It was a standard proposal," Elias said, his voice strained. "From our partners at—" "It was Marrow," Cassian stated. It was not a question. "Shorepine is the gateway, and every transaction is being funneled through the Luminite clearinghouse." "Luminite is the gold standard for offshore settlement," Audrey protested, finding her footing. "It's fully automated. The compliance checks are immaculate." "It's a black box," Cassian countered, his voice flat. "Audrey, I need a full forensic audit of Shorepine. Now." "I already ran it," she said, her voice dropping, trembling. "The moment the market alarms hit my desk this morning, the trails, Cassian, they're clean. They're too clean." She tapped her tablet, her face pale. "The funds are all routed through a tiered services contract for cloud data storage via a shell company in New Kershaw. By the time the money comes out, it's just data. It's washed, and the original source is gone." While Cassian faced his collapsing boardroom, Sarah was in a different kind of war room, a sterile, temporary office at the fictional Civic Anti-Corruption Directorate. She was on a secure line, her voice sharp. "He's not a suspect. He's my witness," she snapped. "His face is on that camera because he was with me, preventing a felony. I am activating full whistleblower protection under the CACD charter for Cassian Rourke, effective immediately. He's not a person of interest. He is a key witness." She hung up, the action sealing Cassian's fate to her own. In the glassworks factory, Nomi hit a wall. Damn it. She was tracing the complex web of cold storage wallets linked to the Nightingale container. The physical cash had been a distraction. The real money was crypto. "Sarah," she reported, her voice tight over their secure comms. They're liquidating. Half the cash from the container has already been dispersed. It's been split into 1,000 micro wallets and is already leaving the country. They've been planning this exit for days. The news of the CACD protection hit the wires at 10 in the morning. It was meant to shield Cassian, but to the market, it just confirmed his involvement in a massive criminal investigation. His investors were in full-blown panic. "I'm calling a private meeting," Cassian announced to Elias and Audrey. "Core investors only. 4 in the afternoon. Here." "You can't," Elias pleaded. "They'll demand your resignation. They'll tear you apart." "Let them," Cassian said. At 4 in the afternoon, the room was thick with unspoken accusations. The heads of the 3 largest funds that backed Northlight sat opposite him. "Cassian, this is a catastrophe," one of them said, forgoing any pleasantries. "Your name is toxic." Cassian stood at the head of the table. "You're correct. My name, and by extension the Northlight name, has been compromised. Whether I am a fool or a criminal, at this point, no longer matters to the market. The perception is the reality." He slid a stack of legal documents across the polished table, which is why, effective immediately, I am handing over my full, temporary voting rights to a newly formed Northlight Integrity Committee. The room was stunned into silence. "You 3, he said, "will sit on it. Audrey will chair it. You will have full transparency, full access. My only condition is that you use the data we provide, not the data Marrow is feeding you, to help us clean this house. I am giving up my control to save my company." It was a move they hadn't anticipated. He wasn't defending himself. He was sacrificing his power. That evening, Sarah was drafting a different document, not a defense, but an attack, a comprehensive civil forfeiture suit aimed not at the shell companies, but at the man. "Ilario Doss," she said. She and Cassian were standing in his penthouse, a glass box overlooking the harbor lights. "He's the head of Marrow, the man in the shadows. We can't find him, but we can find his assets, his yachts, his collection of rare cars, his other penthouse. We're going to seize it all. We make it public, we make it personal. A man like Doss can't stand the humiliation. It will force him to break cover." They stood by the window, the city glittering below. 2 people who had gambled everything. "We're a long way from that bar," Cassian said, his voice low. "We're too far out to turn back." "I'm not interested in turning back," Sarah replied, standing beside him, not touching, but her presence a solid line. "The only way out is through the heart of it." A sharp ping came from the kitchen counter, where Nomi had set up a new command center. "Well, if you want his heart," Nomi called out, "I know where to find it." She projected an image onto the white wall. It was a digital invitation, elegant and obnoxious, gold leaf on an emerald background. "The Astra Opera House," Nomi said. "The annual Sea and Symphony benefit, the single biggest charity gala in Port Astra, and Ilario Doss is the guest of honor." Sarah looked at the date on the invitation. "That's in 2 days." Nomi nodded, her face grim in the blue light of her screens. 48 hours. The clock is officially ticking. The Astra Opera House was a monument to old money, a fortress of marble and gilt lit by the blinding flash of high-end photography. Inside, massive crystal chandeliers hung like frozen waterfalls, illuminating the sea of Port Astra's elite. A string orchestra played a delicate, forgettable waltz. This was the Sea and Symphony benefit, and Cassian Rourke had just walked into the center of the storm. Heads turned, whispers followed them like the rustle of silk. He was in a stark, white tuxedo. A bold, defiant choice for a man whose name was being dragged through the mud. But it was Sarah Vale who owned the room. She was a slash of midnight in black velvet, a dress that was both armor and invitation. Her dark hair swept up, leaving her neck bare. They were not just attendees. They were a declaration. 200 feet above them, on a metal catwalk suspended in the darkness, Nomi Vale, dressed in the gray coveralls of a lighting engineer, worked quickly. She jacked a small device into the main audio-visual console. It was not a bomb. It was a signal generator. programmed to transmit a high-frequency audio flaw at her command, a sound error that would serve as the precise, non-electronic go signal for the CACD teams discreetly forming a perimeter blocks away. Cashin's hand resting lightly on the small of Sarah's back, tensed. "Look," he murmured, his voice flat. Across the grand hall, by a towering ice sculpture, Ilario Doss was holding court. The head of the Marrow Syndicate was disappointingly average, a man in his 50s with a bland face and an expensive suit. But it was the man beside him who made Cassian's blood run cold. Elias Wren, his mentor, the chairman of his board. Elias was smiling, laughing at something Doss had said, and Doss clapped him on the shoulder. It was not the greeting of a new acquaintance. It was the easy, familiar gesture of old, comfortable allies. The betrayal was complete. Doss looked up, his gaze sweeping the room before landing, with practiced precision, on Cassian. He smiled, then, his eyes shifted to Sarah. He excused himself from his group and began to cross the floor. "He's coming," Sarah said quietly. "This is the play. Cassian, let me lead." Doss stopped directly in front of them, his eyes dismissing Cassian as if he were furniture. "Miss Vale," he said, his voice oily, "the crisis lawyer who filed a suit against my holdings this morning. You are, if possible, more impressive than your paperwork." He extended a white-gloved hand. "You will dance with me." Cassian started to move, a protective, instinctual step, but Sarah's hand on his arm stopped him. She gave Doss a brilliant, cold smile and placed her hand in his. "I only dance with men who are prepared to lose, Mr. Doss." Cassian was left standing alone, a glass of champagne in his hand, watching Sarah be swept onto the marble floor in the arms of the man trying to destroy them. The orchestra swelled. Doss held her close, his hand possessively low on her back, his lips moving by her ear. Cassian's jaw ached from the force of his clench. He forced himself to look away, to breathe. On the dance floor, Sarah was working. "You seem confident," she murmured to Doss, leaning in. "I always am," Doss purred. "I find, in this city, everything and everyone has a price." "Even Elias Wren?" she asked. Doss's spin slowed for a fraction of a second. As he turned her, Sarah's hand, small and fast, brushed the inside of his tuxedo jacket, a tiny, specialized RFID reader in her palm grazing the signal-blocking wallet in his pocket. It was enough. She had the key, the digital access to his hidden accounts. Cassian had turned his attention. He saw Elias trying to slip onto the terrace. Cassian intercepted him, his body a solid, unmoving wall. "Elias," Cassian said, his voice a razor in the opulent noise. Elias Wren froze, his face going pale. "Cassian, my boy, This isn't what it looks like. I'm trying to manage this situation from the inside." By handling Doss's champagne, Cassian's voice was lethal. "You're a traitor, Elias. You didn't just breach your fiduciary duty. You committed treason against every investor who ever trusted you." "You don't understand," Elias hissed, his eyes darting. It was just one fun shorepine, a small exposure," he said, "just a way to move some assets." He guaranteed it just like the old days, like the deal at Warehouse 14. Cassian's blood froze. Warehouse 14, the slip-up, the confirmation that Elias knew, from the beginning, about the criminal mixing point. A deafening, high-pitched screech tore through the ballroom. Nomi's signal. The crystal chandeliers flickered, the music died. Someone yelled, "Fire!" and the illusion of civility shattered. The crowd became a mob, surging toward the exits. In the chaos, Doss shoved Sarah away from him. "Get them!" he roared at his men, two of whom were already converging. Sarah was already off the dance floor, grabbing Cassian's hand. "Nomi's triggering the real alarms. This way." They didn't head for the main exit. They plunged through a side door marked Staff, bursting into a narrow, dark backstage corridor. "There," Sarah pointed to a red exit sign at the far end. Two of Doss's bodyguards blocked the path. They were the same men from the bar. Sarah didn't hesitate. She went low, driving her heel into one man's instep, but the second man grabbed her, his fingers biting into her arm. Cassian was not a brawler, but he was a man of leverage. He didn't punch. He grabbed the man holding Sarah by the lapels and used his own weight against him, pivoting, slamming the man's entire body against the brick wall. The man's head hit the plaster with a sickening, dull thud. He collapsed, dazed. The first man was coming at Sarah. "In here," Cassian yelled, seeing a door marked props. He grabbed Sarah and pulled her inside, slamming the heavy door. Sarah fumbled for the lock and threw a heavy, iron deadbolt. It slid home with a resonant clang. They were in total darkness, save for the thin line of light under the door. They stood shoulder to shoulder, chests heaving, adrenaline screaming in their veins. On the other side of the door, fists began to pound. "That was," Sarah panted, "a very decisive move for a CEO. You," Cassian breathed, "are a terrible influence." Their eyes met in the darkness, the heat of the fight and the chase arcing between them. The air was electric, a firestorm of unspoken tension. But the pounding on the door stopped. "They're flanking us," Sarah whispered, all business again. Her earpiece crackled. "Nomi." "I've got it." Nomi's voice was sharp, triumphant. "I have Nightingale Final, the whole ledger, Sarah. CACD has the building surrounded, but Doss, he didn't go for the exits. He's on the roof." Sarah looked at Cassian. "This way, there's a ladder to the catwalks." Moments later, they burst through a metal door onto the roof of the opera house. The wind howled, and the night air was thick with a driving, horizontal rain. Nomi was there, her backpack secure, standing near the edge. 50 feet away, by the private helipad, stood Ilario Doss. He was not alone. He had Elias Wren in a chokehold, a gun pressed firmly to his mentor's temple. "This ends now. Miss Vale," Doss screamed over the storm. "Let him go," Sarah yelled back. CACD sirens wailed from the streets far below, but up here, in the rain, it was a stalemate. Sarah, Cassian, and Nomi on one side, Doss and his hostage on the other. No one moved. No one trusted anyone. The roar of the helicopter blades was a physical blow, flattening the rain against the rooftop. "He's all yours, Rourke," Doss screamed, his face a mask of triumph. With a powerful, sickening shove, Doss threw Elias Wren off the edge of the roof. Elias didn't even have time to scream. He was just gone. "No!" Sarah lunged, but she was too far away. Cassian reacted. His mind, trained for fractions of a second, didn't see the traitor. It saw a life. He dove for the edge, his body skidding on the wet metal, his arm shooting out into the void, his fingers closed. Not on a hand, but on the slick, wet fabric of a tuxedo cuff. He felt the impossible, jerking weight of a falling man. His shoulders screamed, threatening to dislocate. He was holding Elias Wren's entire weight with one hand, his own body halfway over the abyss. Cassian Sarah was on the ground, grabbing his ankle, anchoring him. Below him, Elias was dangling, his eyes wide with a terror so pure it was almost inhuman. Don't let me go," he gurgled. Cassian looked up, 50 feet away. Ilario Doss was climbing into the civilian helicopter. He gave Cassian a mocking salute. This was the choice. He could let go, and Doss would be a murderer. Or he could pull up the man who had ruined him and let the real enemy escape. "Pull!" Sarah yelled, digging her nails into his leg, her voice raw. With a roar that tore from his throat, a sound of rage and agony, Cassian heaved. He used his grip on the parapet to brace, and with Sarah's help, he dragged the dead weight of his mentor back over the edge. Elias flopped onto the roof like a landed fish, slick and pathetic, sobbing. Cassian lay on his stomach, his arm numb, his face pressed to the wet gravel of the roof. He watched as the helicopter's lights tilted, became a star, and vanished into the storm clouds. He had saved the traitor and lost the boss. The moment the CACD agents swarmed the roof, the world turned against him. The narrative was set before dawn. The media, fed by leaks from Marrow's camp. Didn't see a hero. They saw a co-conspirator. Cassian Rourke, Marrow Kingpin. One headline screamed, bungled heroics at opera gala staged to silence partner. By 9 a.m, the CACD, the very organization Cira was affiliated with, was forced to act. They called it procedural independence, a fictional, sterile term that felt like a betrayal. They arrived at his penthouse not with thanks, but with a warrant. Mr. Rourke, the lead agent said, his face impassive, given the public allegations and your presence at 2 separate Marrow-related crime scenes, we are formally detaining you for questioning. He's a witness, Sarah argued, her voice vibrating with a fury Cassian had never heard. He's a person of interest, the agent countered, his eyes cold. And you, Miss Vale, he added, are now officially in conflict of interest, your personal relationship with the subject, he nodded at Cassian, means you are off this case, effective immediately. The 3 pillars of their alliance were shattered in a single morning. Cassian was taken. Sarah was sidelined. And Nomi was framed. The trap was elegant, digital, and impossible to fight, a ghost account she had used for years to monitor Marrow's dark web activity, an account that had no link to her. Suddenly, at 10 a.m, made a single, massive purchase, $1 million in newly issued high-yield digital bonds, offered by a shell company owned by Ilario Doss. It was a digital handshake, a payment, a clear signal of collusion. She was implicated. The team was broken, separated, isolated, each left to face their own demon. Cassian was not in a cell. He was in something worse, a cold room, a sterile, glass-walled interrogation suite in the CACD's brutalist downtown tower. He had been there for 6 hours, refusing to say anything. The door on the other side of the glass partition hissed open. Sarah walked in. She looked small and furious in the cavernous observation room. They were separated by an inch of soundproof, reinforced glass. He reached for the receiver on the wall, and she picked up the one on her side. A cold, static hiss filled his ear. "They're trying to break you," she said, her voice sounding tiny, distant. Her eyes, though, were afire in the cold room. They were locked on his. "They won't," he said. "They're offering deals, Cassian. They're telling me you're the ringleader, that you staged the rescue on the roof." "What do you believe?" he asked. "I am standing here," she said, her knuckles white on the receiver. They stared at each other through the glass, a chasm between them. He wanted, more than he had ever wanted, a market to turn, to reach through that glass and touch her hand, to feel the anchor of her pulse. "Sarah," he said, the name a weight in his mouth. "You're off the case. This isn't your fight anymore. If you walk away now, if you take Nomi and you just run, I don't blame you." Her eyes blazed. She leaned closer to the glass, her breath fogging the pain. "If I quit," she whispered, her voice a blade. "What will you do?" He met her gaze. The cold room, the charges, the media, all of it faded. There was only her. "If you quit," he replied, "I will." It was a vow, a promise made in the worst kind of silence. That night, the Harbor Line Watch, Nomi's tiny, fictional NGO, was raided, a black ops team, not police, not CACD, but private contract muscle, smashed their way into the glassworks factory. Nomi was ready. Alarms blared. She'd been copying, purging, and preparing for this. She shoved the last of her data onto a single, encrypted, air-gapped hard drive. It was the Nightingale final ledger. It was the key. It was the only thing that could clear any of them. She looked at the wall of servers, her life's work, with a grimace. She triggered the thermite charges. The servers began to melt, a cascade of white-hot fire destroying the evidence that could have been twisted against her. She grabbed her backpack, the single drive secure within it, and smashed the window, diving out onto the canal embankment just as the first boot kicked down her door. She was alone. She was hunted. and she was carrying the only truth that was left. Sarah Vale walked into the Northlight boardroom not as a lawyer, but as a traitor. The newly formed Integrity Committee, with Audrey Pike at its head, looked at her with open hostility. "You're not welcome here, Miss Vale," Audrey said, her voice crisp. "You are the source of this problem." "And I am the solution," Sarah countered, dropping a thick legal file on the polished table. "That is the draft of my civil forfeiture suit against Ilario Doss. It details, line by line, every asset he holds, every shell company he uses, and," she paused, "every Northlight asset he has touched. It's your roadmap to recovery. Or," she tapped the file, "it's the bomb that blows up what's left of your company. I'm filing it in 2 hours." The committee members shifted. "What do you want?" Audrey asked, her eyes narrowing. "A private consultation with my witness, Cassian Rourke. I'm trading you this." She tapped the file again. "For 30 minutes, alone." An hour later, Sarah was back in the cold, glass-walled room at the CACD. Cassian stood on the other side. This time, there was no phone. The door hissed open behind him. The agents let him walk into the observation room. "They traded you for a lawsuit?" he asked, his voice rough. "I'm a good negotiator," she said. She didn't move to him. Not yet. Her comms piece, hidden in her ear, vibrated, a single short pulse. "Nomi." She held up a finger, a silent wait. Her focus went distant. A low-frequency radio signal, untraceable, was patching into her ear. A voice, crackling with static and wind, spoke. "Sarah, I'm here. I'm mobile. I have the drive." Sarah's knees almost buckled with relief. "Status," she whispered, her back to the room's camera. "Doss is moving. He's not running. He's relocating." Nomi's voice crackled. "He's at the cold storage, Pier 27. He's loading the real Nightingale, the cash container onto a freighter, the Maelstrom. It sails with the tide in 3 hours. And Sarah, he's not just moving money. He's moving his entire command vault." Sarah's focus snapped back to Cassian. The plan had just changed. "I'm getting you out," she said. She exploited a CACD procedural loophole so obscure it barely existed. She filed an emergency motion, not as his defense, but as the plaintiff in her civil suit. She needed Cassian Rourke, her mandatory material witness, released into her custody to prevent the imminent spoliation of evidence related to her case, the CACD. Furious but bound by their own Byzantine rules and eager to keep him on a short leash, agreed. At 2 a.m, Cassian Rourke walked out of the CACD tower. He was not a free man. He was a prisoner who had just been transferred. They met Nomi in the industrial sector, by a refrigerated truck she had stolen and repainted. The reunion was silent, heavy. 3 people, broken and remade, standing in the rain. Sarah handed Cassian a thin, brushed silver ring. It was unassuming, modern. "This isn't for show," she said. "Nomi located Doss's mobile vault. It's a reinforced shipping container with a biometric lock. The ring you're wearing," she said as he slid it on, "is a key. It's a magnetic pulse that will override the lock's internal power." "That's not what it does," Nomi said, her voice grim from the driver's seat. "I couldn't crack the lock, so I built something better. That ring doesn't open the vault. It changes the code. It's a one-time key changer. You press it to the lock, the vault is re-keyed to you, and Doss is locked out of his own life. It also, incidentally, activates a long-range maritime tracker that pings the CACD's Port Authority." "The trap we couldn't spring," Cassian said, understanding. "We're making him spring it on himself." As the truck rumbled toward the pier, Sarah looked at them both. "We need new rules, not for intimacy, for this. We're all targets. We go in together. What we do for the person next to us." "And we finish it," Cassian said, meeting her gaze. "Or it finishes us." Pier 27 was not a place. It was a weather system. The wind howled, whipping the rain into horizontal sheets. The maelstrom was a black mountain against the gray, storm-tossed sky. Marrow's private guards were everywhere, and 2 thermal imaging drones buzzed over the container yard like angry hornets. "The drones are blind," Nomi said, pointing to the sky. She tossed a handful of small discs onto the tarmac. They hissed to life, chemical heat flares that bloomed on the thermal feed like dozens of human bodies, blinding the drone operators with an army of ghosts. They reached the main yard gate, a rolling steel fence. A port foreman, not Marrow, stepped out, his face like a bulldog's. "Yards closed. Storm protocol." Sarah put her hand on the knife in her boot, but Cassian stepped forward, into the light. He was no longer the haggard prisoner. He was the CEO. "My name is Cassian Rourke," he said, his voice cutting through the wind, calm and absolute. "My name is on every major financial paper in this city, and it will be on your termination papers in the morning. I am moving an asset. You have 2 choices. You can accept the $10,000 I am offering to open this gate and forget our faces. Or you can have the legal hurricane that is about to descend on this pier when I call my lawyers." He smiled, a cold, empty expression. "Your shift ends in 3 minutes. Choose." The foreman looked at Cassian's eyes, then at Sarah's. He chose the money. The gate rumbled open. "The vault is on the west side," Nomi said over the comms, staying with the truck. "But Nightingale is on the east, prepped for loading. You have to split up." Sarah looked at Cassian. "Go." Sarah sprinted toward the loading cranes, a ghost in the storm. She was running a container shuffle, a plan to swap the real Nightingale with a decoy. Cassian ran the other way, toward a reinforced, black shipping container sitting apart from the others. He saw the biometric panel. He pressed the silver ring to the sensor. A green light flashed. Once. The trap was set. "It's done," he whispered. "Get out of there!" Sarah's voice was a scream in his ear. Alarms blared across the yard, not the port alarms, Doss's alarms. A spotlight flooded the container, and Cassian dove behind a stack of barrels. Ilario Doss appeared, striding through the rain. But he was not alone. "You were too slow, Ilario," said Audrey Pike. His CFO, not Elias, the fool, Audrey, the professional, the one who had chaired the integrity committee, she was the real traitor. "He's a romantic. Audrey, he wanted to save his mentor." Doss laughed, his hand moving to the vault's lock. "Now, let's get our money." He pressed his own hand to the biometric scanner. The panel flashed red, access denied. He tried again, red. "What is this?" he snarled, looking at Audrey. "It's not me," she protested. Doss hit the panel with his fist. The vault was locked, sealed, and deep within its electronics, a tiny encrypted signal was already broadcasting its exact coordinates, screaming, "Seize me," to the CACD Maritime Division now closing in on the pier. "He locked us out," Audrey Pike shrieked, her voice thin and breaking in the wind. She grabbed a heavy briefcase from the ground, the one containing her escape plan, her plea deal. "It's over." "Audrey." Cassian's voice cut through her panic. He stepped out from behind the barrels. He was calm. He was the CEO again. "You can fix a balance sheet. You can't fix trust." Ilario Doss turned, his face a mask of incandescent rage. His vault was locked. The CACD was coming. His entire world was collapsing. He saw Cassian, the source of his ruin. He raised his gun, his arm rock steady, aiming directly at Cassian's chest. "Ilario, no!" Audrey screamed. But Sarah was already moving. She didn't hesitate. She didn't calculate. She simply acted. She launched herself from the shadows and slammed into Cassian, her body shielding him, a living wall between him and the bullet. It was a choice made in a fraction of a second, as clear and absolute as the pounding of the waves against the pier. Doss's finger tightened on the trigger. "Now, Noemi," Sarah screamed. An explosion, not of force, but of light. Noemi, from her perch on the truck's roof, hit the switch. Every high-intensity fog light on the pier, rewired and amplified, detonated in a single, blinding, white-hot flash. The yard was bleached of shadow. Doss, his vision completely gone, fired wildly. Sarah did not wait. In that second of blindness, she grabbed his gun hand. It was not a fight, it was a deflection. She twisted her wrist, forcing his arm away from them. A shot cracked through the air, deafeningly loud, the bullet aimed at Cassian's heart, instead sparked harmlessly against a steel mooring post. The sound of the shot was drowned by the roar of boat engines and the thud of boots on the pier. The Oriole, the CACD patrol vessel, had its high-powered spotlights trained on the scene, locking them all in beams of white. Agents swarmed from the gangplank, weapons raised. "Ilario Doss, you're under arrest." It was over. Doss stood, blinking, disarmed and defeated. Audrey Pike had collapsed against the vault. The picture of corporate malfeasance. CACD agents had them both in cuffs within seconds. And then, stumbling out of the shadows, came Elias Wren. He had apparently been hiding in the warehouse. His white tuxedo was stained with grease and fear. "Thank God," he sobbed, lurching toward Cassian. "Cassian, my boy, you saved me. You have to tell them. I was a victim." A hard-faced agent stepped in front of him. "Sir, you're coming with us." "What, no, I'm a witness." "You're being detained for obstruction of justice and accessory to a criminal enterprise. Mr. Wren." The snap of the handcuffs was the last pathetic note of his career. A CACD technician worked on the vault. The tracker locked it, but the failsafe just triggered. He called out, with a heavy, hydraulic sigh. The massive steel door of the vault unsealed and swung open. It wasn't full of gold, it was full of proof. Hard drives, ledgers, and binders. The entire, unadulterated, decade-long black book of the Marrow Syndicate's interstate money laundering operation, the root, it was all there. The agents were busy. The rain had softened to a mist. Sarah, her entire body shaking from the adrenaline, finally turned. Cassian was standing right where she had left him, his eyes only on her. He didn't say thank you. He didn't say a word. He just opened his arms. She fell into his embrace, burying her face against his chest, her hands gripping the back of his jacket. He held her. His arms wrapped around her so tightly it was as if he could absorb her, protect her from the aftermath. He could feel her heart hammering against his, and for the first time in his life, his own variables were perfectly, terrifyingly aligned. He breathed in the scent of her hair, rain and gunpowder. "Well," a dry voice came from beside them. "You two finally done? You're blocking the light. Some of us still have evidence to log." Nomi stood there, backpack on, smirking. "Glad you could make it, Cassian." The dawn was cold and gray. Cassian stood before a throng of reporters, not in his penthouse, but on the steps of Northlight Capitol. "Effective this morning," he said, his voice carrying in the quiet air, "I have placed Northlight Capitol under the full control of the Temporary Integrity Committee. My authority is suspended." A gasp went through the crowd. "But my responsibility is not," he continued. "Therefore, I am personally pledging the entirety of my own Northlight shares to establish a new, independent fund. It will be called the Gannett Row Integrity Fund, and its sole mission will be to rebuild the communities that my company, through my negligence, allowed to be poisoned." He was giving it all away. He looked into the cameras, but he was speaking to her. That night, they were back in the attic room at the Ash Lantern. The storm was over. They stood on the small balcony, the city of Port Astra quiet below them. Sarah was wrapped in a thick hotel blanket, and Cassian stood behind her, his arms wrapped around her, his chin resting on her head. "You gave it all away," she whispered, her voice muffled. "I didn't," he replied, his voice low. "I traded it for something real." She turned in his arms to face him. The space between them was gone. His hands found her face, his thumbs brushing her cheekbones. This kiss was not the desperate, rushed collision from before. It was slow. It was deep. It was a promise of a morning that was yet to come. It was full of warmth and the quiet, breathless whisper of a future they had, against all odds, just built. Weeks later, the city was healing. The first exhibition of the revived Port Astra Glassworks, funded by the new Gannett Row Fund, was opening. Cassian was there, not as a CEO, but as a man. Sarah walked up to him, a small smile on her face. She was holding the tarnished silver pendant. "You've been holding on to this," he said. "It was insurance," she replied, "but the contract is paid." She stood on her toes and, in the middle of the crowded, bright room, she fastened the chain around his neck. It was no longer a secret. It was a public promise. Nomi appeared, holding 2 small paper tickets. "You two are disgusting," she said, but she was smiling. She pressed the tickets into Cassian's hand. "Shoreline 9, the coastal train, your first vacation. Don't come back for a week." As Sarah and Cassian linked hands, their future stretching out like the train line, Nomi's phone pinged. She looked down. A new, anonymous, encrypted message had just arrived. One line: "Marrow isn't dead." The war was not over, but for the first time, in a city that had been swallowed by darkness, love had chosen to stand in the light. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I'd love to know where in the world you are listening from. So please drop a comment below and share your thoughts. Let's connect. And if you enjoyed this journey, please subscribe to our channel, Mafia Boss Story. Give this video a like and hit that hype button. It helps more than you know and ensures these stories get heard by so many more.